So you get a pattern for a quilt and you make it. And at the very end, you're proud of it. You're finished. But you know what the instructions probably say? Layer the batting and backing and quilt top and quilt as desired. Well, that's okay, but what do I desire? What choices do I have in quilting this quilt? Well, let's explore a lot of the options that you have. This is the Baby Lock Altair, and we'll be exploring several different ways that you can get your quilt quilted. I'm Cathy, and this is Sewing Tech Talk. So what do we desire? It just depends on the quilt, of course. But let's explore 4 different options on the Baby Lock Altair because it has some unique options that you may not be aware of. The first one I want to talk about is the digital dual feed that comes with the Altair and doing quilting in a grid. Grid quilting is pretty accessible for everyone. It's really just straight lines and they intersect, or they could just be parallel lines. And it really adds a fun feeling to a quilt, and it could look very modern for you modern quilters out there. So the first thing you're going to do when you're doing a grid quilt is you're going to lay down the first line to stitch on it straight. And you're going to be using a marker for that and stitching on the quilt to get a straight line. After that, you need to do lines that are either evenly or not so evenly spaced, depending on the look that you want to get. The first line I need to put on the quilt using a removable marker. So a removable marker could be just about anything. There's tons of them out there. Here's a couple different ones. Here's one that marks on dark fabrics. Here's an air erasable one. But quite frankly, my favorite is one that really doesn't make a mark at all. It makes a crease, and it's called a Hera marker. And what a Hera marker is it looks just like this, and it makes a crease line in the quilt. And I don't know if you can see that on the video, but there's just a crease coming in the quilt, and that's going to be my stitching line. Now, I've already started this quilt, but that's how I started it. Now, let me show you how easy it is. Obviously, I'd be using my ruler on the other side, but just to show you, here I come, and I just make that mark, and there's a crease in the quilt that lasts long enough for you to stitch. So it's a mark without making a mark. So we are going to be using the digital dual feed on this. And the digital dual feed comes with the Baby Lock Altair. It's different than a walking foot. If you didn't have this option, you would be using a walking foot. A walking foot, it's an attachment that goes on the machine, and what happens is when the machine stitches, it lifts up the pressure on the fabric so the feed dogs can pull the multiple layers through, hopefully at the same time. Because a quilt can shift on you if there's pressure on the top and the feed dogs pull that bottom layer through. A digital dual feed is quite different. How it works is it has a band that's touching the fabric at all times, and it's going to move the fabric through at the same rate that the feed dogs are moving, because you literally plug it into the back of the machine so it knows how fast those feed dogs are going. But there's an advantage to it because you can adjust it. When you layer a quilt, you do the best you can, but sometimes when you're coming up to the crossing over a tuck, you're going to get you might get a tuck when we don't want that. So you can increase the speed of that band on the top to ease that top layer end and not get any tucks at all. So now that we've made our first mark and we're going to stitch, what I have is I have adjusted my digital dual feed band in the settings, and let me show you what that looks like. So here I am all set up. We're going to talk about the LED guide light as well. But when I come up to settings, oops, now that's a great feature though. I locked the screen in case the quilt hits it. So I'm going to have to unlock the screen so I can access the settings. So here's the settings, and here's the digital dual feed adjustment. And I have it put up to about 6. It comes basically with no adjustment at all. But when I increase that top feed, what it does is going to pull fabric at the top a little bit faster than it is on the bottom with the feed dogs, and it's going to ease in any potential tucks that I could get. So, and I can't tell you which number, it just depends on your quilt. That 6, that's been working for my little quilt that I'm stitching here. So that's good. Now, while we're at the screen, let me show you what else I have engaged. So there's the digital dual feed. When I've plugged it in, it shows me I have that foot on. But I also have an LED guide light, and I can move that light wherever I wish. I can have it directly on the top of the stitching, and that's where I'm going to move it right now. So it's going to shine on the fabric exactly where I'm going to be stitching, which is really going to help me follow that crease line I made with my marker. Now there's an optional accessory for the digital dual feed, and that's a quilt guide. And what the quilt guide does is it attaches to the digital dual feed, and it shows you the distance you are from the other quilting line that you've already stitched. So between the two, you have no excuse to not to do straight lines. So here I am. Now what I'm going to do is I am going to take my top thread, pull it to the back, get everything out of the way, and I'm going to stitch using the LED guide light right along that crease line, and at the same time I have my quilt guide to show me I'm doing a good job on the side. Now, when I finish sewing, I have a couple options. I can reinforce my stitch, because on the machine I have an automatic reinforcement. And by touching that button, the machine's going to stitch in place several times. Or I could even have it take a few stitches backwards. But I want to bury my threads, so I'm not going to use my cutter at all. So I'm literally going to use my needle down and needle up to pull that bottom thread up, and then I'm good to go. So when I go needle up, I'm going to lift my foot up out of the way, pull the fabric, and just clip my threads top and bottom. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come back later. I'm going to sit and watch TV, quite frankly, and use a large-eyed hand sewing needle to bury those threads. Like I said, it's just one of a couple ways to bury the threads, and it's totally optional. It takes a bit of time, so if you make a commitment to it, that's what you're doing. Now, let's talk about another option that we have using the feed dogs in the machine. I have, on the Baby Lock Altair, lateral sewing. What the heck is that? That means the machine can sew sideways. But the digital dual feed, it doesn't sew sideways. So let's switch the machine over. I'm going to take my quilt off temporarily, and we're going to take off the digital dual feed. It unscrews from the machine, and there is that quilt guide that I talked to you about. It attaches to the top right up here, and it's completely adjustable, so I can make a very wide grid if I wanted to. And this is another option for the digital dual feed. It's the open toe sole. You could use the regular sole, but I happen to have this one so that I use it. This is where it plugs into the back. So this is that band on the bottom that pulls the fabric through either faster or at the same rate. So pretty neat accessory. And the dual feed itself, it comes with the machine. Now let's do some lateral sewing, and I want to show you a trick with that as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach the standard presser foot ankle to the machine, and I am going to be sewing a very wide stitch, and this is a 40mm decorative stitch, if you will. Now what happens is I'm going to be sewing on top of multiple layers, and they can shift. Like I said, the dual feed would be great, but it doesn't sew sideways, and I want to use one of these fancy stitches. So I am going to be using a foot that does not come with the machine. I'm going to be using an Ultra T foot. What this is, it's a resin composite material, and it's very slick. It doesn't add friction when I'm sewing, so it's going to help this fabric flow sideways to do this large stitch. So I'm just going to pop it on the machine. Oops, there we go, there's our thread. And I want to show you a couple tricks. The first one is I want to sew and I want to adjust my machine because I'm going to be sewing over multiple layers. There's a special stitch on the machine. Now, I have a handout that shows you this stitch and all the things I'm talking about. If you go to the description of the video, it's usually highlighted in blue and it takes you to this handout and all my others. But this is a funny looking stitch, and I stitch it because I can also adjust the machine for this technique just like I can for that digital dual feed. So let's find this stitch. When I come to character decorative stitch, what I'm going to do is under section 6, see if I can find it. It's a funny looking stitch that looks like a cartoon bubble. There it is right now. And I really just want one of them, so I'm going to stitch one. Now, I'm going to stitch this on top of a practice piece of fabric. It's the same batting, similar fabric to what I'm using. I want to stitch this out and I want to check and make sure that it meets. What we wanted to do is to meet at the very bottom. Here was my first one, and this is how I adjusted it. Let's see what that looks like. I'm going to turn my guide light off because I really don't need it for this. So it actually did pretty good. If you can see, it's a little bit over to the right. I need to move it this way a little bit. So let's go to the settings and see how we adjust that. Once again, we're going to go up to the settings pages, and right here on the very first page is the fine vertical and horizontal adjustment. So here's my sample. I need to take this part and move it over just a little bit. There we go. So that should work. And I'll sew another one just to be sure that everything's going to be fine. But let me show you the cool stitch I chose, because it looks like I'm the world's best free motion quilter, but the machine did all the work. So okay, and I am going to go to this stitch right here. This is the one whoop, not that one. That's the one that I chose. Now it looks like a cute little decorative stitch, but in reality, it's that big, which is pretty cool, right? So now, okay. Now, let's stitch this out on another sample piece of fabric and see what it looks like. Now, these stitches don't stitch very fast. It's just something that you have to contend with. The machine's sewing sideways. I don't even know how it does it. But you're going to be stitching for a bit if you're doing the very long edge of your quilt like I am. Now, I can stitch without the foot control, which means I don't have to sit here the whole time and have my foot on the foot control. I can just be watching that I'm guiding the fabric. And speaking of guiding the fabric, I can use that guide light to help me stitch straight as well. So when I engage the guide light, it's challenging to see on this dark fabric, but I have a guide to help me sew straight because the fabric's going to be, well, you'll see. Let's sew. Unplug the presser foot and just press the green button. Now, I don't know about you, but that makes me look like I really know what I'm doing. And I've used it down the outside edge of my little quilt here. Let me show you what that looks like. I'm going to plug the foot control back in because we're going to use it on our next adventure. But let me show you the corner of my little quilt and what I did. So in the corner, and yes, we're going to get there in a few minutes, I did a simple embroidery design, and I'm joining one embroidery design to the other with this fun little stitch. So I'm kind of combining a lot of different techniques in this one little quilt. But this stitch, you can see that I didn't do a lot of work. I just invested a little bit of time. So those are the lateral sewing stitches. I use the Ultra T foot to reduce the friction, and I set up the machine for my particular project by doing the adjustment to the vertical or the horizontal, whichever one I needed. Now, I'm going to say something. Don't leave. let's talk about free motion, because that's another option when you're doing your quilt, right? You can stitch free motion and go all kinds of different directions. Don't leave, don't leave. I have a trick. Let me show you that trick. So now we're going to take off this ankle and our Ultra T foot, and let me show you that there are 3 different feet that come with the Baby Lock Altair. This is the hopping foot. Let me put the dark fabric up here so that you can see. This is the hopping foot, and I use that when a quilt has lots of very high seams. Here is a foot with a low profile. Great foot. But here's a very special foot called the Echo Quilting foot. And here it is. Now, what's the advantage to this one? Well, it is plastic and it is clear, but you can also sew with it with the feed dogs up. That gives us a couple advantages. So let me show you what I mean. Let's attach it. It comes with a low shank adapter. That's how it goes on the machine. And I'm going to screw it on. So now this foot is a foot that you can sew with as well. So I attached my foot. Now let's sew with it and do free motion as well. So let's find that part of my quilt I want to free motion on. So now, here is a straight line on my quilt, and I'm going to quilt around my little puppy here. So that when I'm going around the puppy, I need to go around, so I want to do free motion because it's easy to maneuver. But when I'm doing this straight line here, well, I want the feed dogs up, because let's let the machine do the work. Now, here's the other trick. When I'm sewing with the feed dogs up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust the speed of the machine. And while it's sewing, I'm going to watch how fast it's moving that fabric. And that's what I need to imitate when I'm doing my free motion. When I switch to free motion, it's just the touch of a button. So let's we're not going to do this stitch, we're going to go back to our straight stitch. So let's go back to our utility stitch. Okay, and I want to stitch with the center needle position. And notice the machine took off that digital dual feed foot. It knows I'm stitching with a regular foot, or the free motion foot. Now, let me show you how fast this machine's going to stitch when I've set my speed and I'm stitching with this free motion foot that lets me sew with the feed dogs up. I think I'm going to take off my LED light because it's not going to help me go around the corner in free motion. Now watch how fast it stitches when it's going down this straightaway. Great. Now I need to imitate that speed when I'm doing free motion. I'm going to switch the machine over. Are you ready? You want to see it again? You just touch a button and it flips the machine over to free motion. Now this very same foot is going to let me go around the puppy. Now I've come to the ear of the puppy, and I just want to show you. I'd probably do that free motion, but if I want to use the feed dogs of the machine to flip back and forth and have the feed dogs do it, it's as simple as touching that same button. And I hope you agree, that makes free motion pretty easy when half the time, if you have a straightaway, the machine's doing half the work. So we've explored 3 ways so far. The digital dual feed, we're using that lateral sewing for me to sew along the outside edge of my quilt. It makes it look like I'm a really good free motion stitcher. And when I do go to free motion, if I'm stitching straight, I can let the machine do half the work too. So there's one other option we have, and the Altair is a sewing machine, a quilting machine, but it's also an embroidery machine. Not only that, but it lets you come up with your own design to do an embroidery. So if I wanted to do a quilting design that I found in a book, I could literally take that image and let the machine switch it over and create an embroidery design out of any image, and there's built-in shapes in the machine also. So let me switch over to embroidery and we'll see how simple it is to create your own design, and it makes you look like you really know what you're doing when the machine stitches that quilting using embroidery. Let me switch over and I'll be right back. So I've switched over to embroidery, and I just want a fun, funky flower for the corner of my quilt. So I'm going to make one in IQ Designer. Like I said, you can take an image and you can literally make your own design from a printed image that you might have found in a magazine or a book or even on the internet. And I've done videos on that. But let me just show you how quick it is to take one of the built-in shapes and make a fun, funky flower to go in the corner of my quilt. You ready? You might want to time me. So here I am at the IQ Designer workspace. I'm going to touch the shapes, and here's my fun, funky flower now. Okay, and there it is. Now, I've measured my quilt, and I know I want about a 3-inch flower in the corner. So I just touch size, and I'm going to take this down from 6.5 to about 3. That should work. Okay, now I just want a basic stitch. So I come in here, I just want a simple stitch, and I'm just going to touch red so that you can see what I've done. Okay, touch the bucket, touch all the different outlines, make sure everything turns to that straight stitch, hit next. There's part of my flower. There's all of my flower. Preview. Okay. Now, I'm ready to stitch this flower in the corner of my quilt. Pretty fast. Did you time me? Now let's just put this flower down in the lower right. I brought up the 5x7 so that I know. Oops. I accidentally made my flower 4x4, and I really need a 3x3. No problem. Because this is just a regular embroidery design, I can change the size of it, because in the Altair I can go up 200% and go down 60. So let's just do that. Edit, size. I want to recalculate stitches. Absolutely. Let's take this, whoops, and make it about 3 inches. That's better. So when you create a design in the machine, it's just like any other embroidery design. Now I'm truly ready to go. Okay, let's move this flower to the lower right-hand corner. Go to embroidery. Now, I have all kinds of ways to place it because it's the Baby Lock Altair. Basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the upper right of the flower and use my hands or the move key just to move it into place. I can use fine adjustments to move that up here, make sure. And I am using an optional accessory. I'm using the Baby Lock 5x7 magnetic frame because when it comes to quilting on a quilt, embroidering on a quilt, same thing. It's really easy to lay it on there and use the magnets to just snap it into place. So let's see if I have this all where I need to go. Ready to go. Now, from creating the design to stitching the design, it's faster than if I looked in my collection of designs to find one. Let's just stitch it out. Ta-da! 4 fun ways to get your quilt quilted as desired. Baby Lock Altair rockin' machine. George, tell him a little bit more about this awesome machine. And remember, lots of ways to get your quilt quilted.
Thanks, Kathy. As usual, that was an incredible presentation. The Baby Lock Altair is dollar for dollar the most advanced machine in the industry. It has a large 9.5 by 14-inch embroidery area, plus 494 built-in beautiful designs, 30 of the most amazing fonts that you can arc and ray and edit, plus many large, beautiful monograms. You have the ability to create a design without a computer. With the IQ Designer, you can take an image from a phone, send it to a machine, and it turns into beautiful embroidery instantly. You also have an automatic applique creator to create great borders around names and other embroidery designs. Plus, of course, we love our never miss needle threader, and it also cuts all the jump stitches that you want. Now, it's not just for embroidery. This is an incredible machine with an 11.25-inch opening. It also has a automatic fabric sensor. This fabric sensor senses heavy fabric like denim and sews automatically from there. It will also sew on lighter fabric like tricot. It will sew elastic. It's incredible. Now, for the real difficult fabric and for quilting, it has a digital dual feed with a belt system that controls all fabrics perfectly. It also has a laser guide, so you can guide for that perfect seam allowance. It's incredible. As I mentioned, this is dollar for dollar the most advanced machine in the industry. We have a special package right now. The total package value is $14,999, but we have it on sale for $8,999. We're offering free shipping across the country, as well as we have interest-free payments of under $188 a month. But that's not all. We have a special bonus. For a limited time, and while supplies last, we're including 63 spools of beautiful embroidery thread, 2 separate design collections by Anita Good Design, which has over 600 design files in all different styles. We're including stabilizer, all kinds of needles, bobbins, and a membership to Love of Knowledge. We're here, you're going to see all kinds of demonstrations and techniques on the Baby Lock Altair and other sewing techniques. This is for a limited time, but I also mentioned we have interest-free payments. Now, for those who don't want to finance, we have even a better bonus. So give us a call at 1-800-865-9664 or click on the link to order today. Bye for now.